Hey everyone, welcome to the Let Loose podcast, the podcast dedicated to all things Gym Leader Challenge in the Pokemon TCG. I am your host, Jeff Beisch, and today we are joined by what I consider, and what many people consider to be one of the greatest players, especially on the online scene. You know, I know there's some people out there who haven't been playing because they've been playing in person or maybe have gone away since Pokemon TCGO, but Geffrey's my GOAT for now. So Geffrey, welcome to the stream. Welcome to the podcast. It is a pleasure to have you, dude.
Welcome. I'm very glad to be here, and you really flatter me. Been grinding a lot, and yeah, I just love GLC so much.
Yeah.
So damn much.
That's awesome, dude. We love having you on, man. And it's rare to find people that love Gym Leader Challenge as much as you do, and that love kind of the simplicity and art of like the consistent deck building. So, you know, when I think of you, and there's a couple of other people in my head, when I think of like, man, what list, if I was going to play like the optimized list or like the best list or the list that's going to guarantee me the most playing time in my tournament, you know, what list am I going to play? I look to your list, to be honest. So, Geffrey, we need to know more about you. First off, you know, tell us about yourself, how long you've been playing GLC. We got to know your favorite decks, all of these things. Just let it loose. Tell us all about yourself.
All right, so I'm a Belgian GLC player. I've probably been playing GLC from right around the start when Andrew Mahone came out with it. I've been grinding it since PTCGO was still a thing. I did not compete in the first Cardboard Warriors season. That was still on PTCGO, but I did play with a few of my locals already back then. And yeah, I never stopped playing ever since. And the people probably most know me from my colorless lists, my Porygon Slacking and Porygon Swallow builds. I'm just a sucker for Porygon Z, the Crazy Coat ability. It's my favorite thing to do. Getting 4 special energies in a turn, it's amazing. I think. But back in the day, I used to play a lot of Darkness. Back in the PTCGO days, and I made a custom Darkness playmat for it, and it's very popular at the regionals, at the GLC tournaments. Unfortunately, it's not tournament legal, so I can't play in it in the standard. But at the GLC side events, the judges are very nice about it, and they let it slide, so to say. But yeah, GLC, I'm a sucker for consistency, and I think that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today. So
Yeah, let's get to it. You know, and I do have to mention the playmat because if you guys have not seen Geffrey's playmat, it is the best playmat. I need to find a picture of it and like upload it, put it in the podcast, talk over it during this time. But
yeah,
it's super sweet. It's all like the dark,
I'll definitely send you.
the dark
I'll definitely send
Pokemon.
you a picture of it.
Oh, appreciate it. But yeah, it's like all the dark Pokemon. I think even like the discard piles, like trade fodder for Liepard and stuff like that. It's like if you're a huge dark
Yeah.
fan, you the template's super sweet, and you made the template yourself, right?
Yeah. So, a buddy of mine, Matthew, which we're going to mention a couple of times
Mm-hmm.
in this podcast, he made the general technical layout of the playmat. It's like a schematic sketch, basically. But we came up together with what should be on it because he made it for his standard Zoro box list.
Mm-hmm.
And so I adapted it because yeah, I was playing Dark GLC like 24/7 basically. So I needed my own version. And after that, he made a Fluffy box and a Reggie Gigas one for the Reggie deck. And that was also went viral during one of the standard tournaments in Europe. But then they got banned from the standard. So
Whoa,
yeah.
yeah, tough. But yeah, playmats are sweet. We'll definitely be checking them out. But yeah,
Yeah.
today we're going to be talking, you know, what you mentioned, consistency basically, and you wrote an article, and in that article you mentioned kind of this, you know, these 3 letters, this acronym that we're going to talk a lot about today. And it's kind of like I want to say it's your mantra when it comes to deck building. You know, when I look at your list, these are the 3 things I think about, and that's CRC, which you've told us is consistency, redundancy, and comeback, which are, again, 3 big parts of what goes on in every single Gym Leader Challenge game. To give you a quick shout out, you wrote a sick article about your crazy code list that ended up winning the spring championship. And it's basically just CRC hidden within it. So, it even mentions
Yep.
CRC kind of at the beginning, but like, don't be fooled that it's about Crazy Code Colorless, because it's such deeper than that. So kudos to you, man. What were you thinking when you were writing this article, coming like straight off a big win?
Yeah, I wanted to highlight the deck a little bit because obviously winning the tournament with it, people want to know the inner details of the list. But I thought it was a good opportunity to give a little bit more and go a little bit deeper about how I built all of my decks because the CRC, I came up with it because of the article, but it was my philosophy from the start, right? Because I really do like to play a lot of games and having inconsistent decks often leads to not playing the game. So that's why I really try to push consistency. And yeah, I try to get the people some insight on why I have been playing so good, I guess. Getting so much results is because I keep the CRC in mind. And I think all three factors, because we've been talking a lot about consistency, but I think also the redundancy and the comeback are very important parts to create winning lists. So
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And as someone who, oftentimes doesn't follow this guidelines because I'm looking for the meme or the fun deck, those decks, they don't win lots of games sometimes. You're going to have fun moments. You're going to have pop off moments. Like, I love Hitmon Bros. Again, everyone knows me as the guy who loves Hitmon Bros. And a lot of what Hitmon Bros does is super sweet and super fun. And sometimes it feels consistent. And then every now and then I get tricked into thinking that, fighting isn't like that. And part of the sad part about making kind of the visuals for this after looking at the outline that you worked on for this episode was we're not going to mention a lot of fighting cards today. I don't think a single fighting card is on the CRC
no,
presentation that we're going to get.
unfortunately, fighting is a little bit lacking in that department. Don't get it mistaken. I'm also a sucker for crazy meme decks, very greedy lists. I love to see them, but yeah, they're less consistent at winning tournaments, and over, I really like to win tournaments, so that's why I like to play the most consistent and best decks
Yeah.
at
And
the tournament.
you're good at it. You're good at it. So we're going to talk. And again, the theme of the episode, of course, is consistency, redundancy, and comeback. But we're going to talk through it like the medium of your deck. And so this is the deck. And I picked the deck list that was most recent on Cardboard Warrior. So if anything's changed, feel free to talk it through. But this was your crazy punch list. Now, it needs to be said, you been playing this list for like almost a year, it feels like at this point. So you've put in tons of reps. You've got a lot of different iterations of this list. Before you walked into the tournament, like, why did you settle specifically on this list?
I felt I was always going to play colorless because this is just my favorite type, and I was always going to play Porygon Z. I know probably a lot of people think that Turbo Snorlax is probably the best colorless list, but I couldn't let it happen. I needed to play the Porygon. And I thought that with the Swallow offering some comeback mechanics about a thing we're going to talk about later on in this episode, allowing me to take more prizes and jump ahead in the prize trade against certain decks uh, would be very good in general. I think against cards like Spiritomb, you can take easy prizes. You don't even need to run the Crisis Punch with it, just doing 20 damage, or I don't even know what the first attack damage is on the Swallow. It's just abysmal, but most of the times the Spiritomb is only going to have 10 or 20 HP left, so that's super awesome. And the only thing I did specifically add for the spring champion, the last championship was the startling megaphone, and I added Lost City because I felt like I had just way more different kind of attackers than the other Turbo Likes builds. So if I was going to be the one who initiated the Lost City, I was going to be the one getting rid of their Snorlax, putting them at a very disadvantaged position because my Snorlax would still be around probably. And I also run the Dodrio and the Swallow, so that's I guess two more attackers than most turbo lists, so it doesn't really matter if the Lost City stays into play. Even the Porygon is a valuable attacker in its own, 120. Um, if you can get the therapeutic energy, you don't even mind about the confusion it puts on itself. So, and the Startling Megaphone I put in because um, a lot of builds were going for big basics with HP buffing tools. And I wanted to make sure that even attackers like Cyclozar and Kangaskhan, whose damage outputs are not always that high, would be able to take KOs when needed. And that plays a bit in the redundancy part we're going to talk about later. So
I mean, the list is super tight, super fun, and I think you nailed on the head when you mentioned like your kind of thinking about what the other colorless decks are going to be doing, and the stuff that you tagged in was great because I think you ended up it was finals colorless versus colorless, right? And you ended up taking the W in
yeah,
that. I think the turbo colorless deck's only loss on the day was to your colorless deck too. I think 2 times in Swiss and then in the finals. So smart teching for that particular matchup because when you think of turbo colorless, you think of like they get to see a multitude of cards per turn, but your deck is just filling its hand. Like you're going to have all these options
yeah.
available to you, and it's funny just to think about the difference between what the two decks are trying to do. While at their core, they're both kind of like Snorlax attacking decks, and it was great. It was fun. It was fun to see happening. Obviously, didn't get to play, but obviously, I was rooting for something fun to happen, and the fact that we got a colorless finals maybe wasn't the most fun thing, but the fact that we got to see your deck on display, taking down the deck that everyone thought was just going to run the tournament, was exciting too. So this is the colorless list that we didn't think would win, but we've always got to bet our money on you, Jeffrey, when you're playing in a tournament. Like you said, you like to win, and it happens often. But yeah, let's get into it a bit. So again, we're going to be talking the CRC using kind of your deck list. We'll talk through kind of what some other types have on the whole. And again, fighting will be omitted because not a lot of it's going to come from there. So we're going to start with consistency here. And in your list, you're running kind of these two draw options. You're running Bibarel and you're running Cinccino. Bibarel lets you draw up to 5 with Industrious Incisors. And then Cinccino kind of helps you build those big hands, discarding a card from your hand to draw 2. That we also mentioned you were running the Dodrio in your list, which is draw a card, put a damage counter on it. It's also a great attacker. It does, X damage per the number of damage counters on it. So it's another kind of consistency piece here, but also kind of a great attacker for a single energy. When you were building your deck, why did you opt specifically for these pieces over maybe something like the Oranguru Squovit option?
Because in my mind, the Cincino is the best draw engine if you could choose any, because sometimes you're just going to have more than 5 cards in your hand, and the barrel is not always going to be alive. But Cincino will always draw you cards. Doesn't really matter how big your hand is. Um, so I really like the Cincino. The fact that it's also levelable, searchable makes it even better. The attack is not irrelevant. I don't play the basic energies in my list, but lists that do play basic energies, it can also aid in those. And then the Bibarel I chose because I wanted to make sure I was N and Iono proof at end of games, because that's one of the key comeback mechanics in Pokemon in general. When you're at your last prize cards, your opponent slams down that end to 1, and then you just need to pray that the one card you have in the top deck is good enough. But having an ability like Industrious Incisors, refilling your hands, um, yeah, is super clutch, especially at the end of the game. Um, because yeah, at the start, sometimes you kind of have a lot of evolutions in your hand, and you can easily get to the 5 cards in hand, so you don't really get to use the ability all that often. Um, but with the Porygon build specifically, you don't really have the bench space to put the Squovit. So that's the trade-off you need to make. Um, is obviously the Squovit Oranga Ruby Barrel engine is insane. It sees you so many cards. But the reason I think the Barrel Cincino might be a little bit better is because I feel like when I I get to make more decisions, and the Skovet Rangaroo has to just play the cards they're dealt, right? Because they don't get to draw extra cards; they just need to stash them away and see. Oh, these are the three cards I have right now. Yes, this is my supporter for turn, right? And I often have 7, 8 cards in my hand, so I get to make decisions. I can't play Data and Liza for just the switch effects because hey, I have already so many cards in my hand. I don't need to shuffle draw, and I just like having the getting to choose which effect I want to use. And then, as you mentioned, the Dodrio, just drawing one card can be super clutch at times because that extra one card might be just that vacuum you need or that extra energy you need to attack. Uh, and another hidden consistency piece in the list is the Cyclozar, because I'm probably one of the only people still playing that Cyclozar, but I swear by it, the Turing ability, drawing 2 cards, super clutch, especially on an attacker. Uh, the energy you put onto it isn't wasted at all, doing 100 damage or maybe a little bit more with the damage buffs is super clutch.
Yeah, that the cycles are that you're playing is definitely kind of a shock to a lot of people when they look at your list, because it's 1 energy draw 2, and then the second attack is just 3 energy 100. It does have free retreat, so it has value, let alone like by itself there. But the other people are running like the one that has 1 retreat cost, but it's 3 energy 70 plus 70 if you play a supporter, and that's the one that's kind of been a little bit more popularized, especially in the
Yep.
turbo colorless list. So interesting to see that, but I think we're going to see later on why the 100 damage on your Cyclozar really isn't 100 damage when we get into the
For sure.
pieces. Now, first off, huge shout out to Jeffrey, because Jeffrey is the first person to really kind of plan like an entire episode. Like I sent him an outline that I was planning to do, and I looked back like 10 minutes later, and he was just like, "Yeah, I'm done. It's filled out. Like every single thing was filled out, and I just had to go in and make the visual." So huge shout out to Jeffrey for this. Super knowledgeable. So I appreciate you. You saved me a ton of time with this, and obviously we get a ton of things to talk about because of it. But you mentioned like in decks in general, not just the colorless decks, there's kind of two types of consistency pieces. There's draw, and then there's search. And so you sent me a list of some cards that we're going to see in other types as well for consistency that are considered draw engines. So we have Artillery, draw up to 5, Zebstrika, discard, draw 5, Delphox, draw up to 6, Beautify, the same thing, draw up to 6. Reverum is similar, but it is discard an energy, any energy, and draw up to 6. And then you've got Liepard, Kirlia, and Tinkaton here, all with trade abilities, discard 1, and then draw up 2. Liepard and Kirlia are both 2, and then Tinkaton is 3. So these are kind of the consistency pieces that are similar to what you're running in your Turbo Colorless list for drawing cards that other types can see play. Again, notable omission here, fighting. I'm trying to think if there's another type that we're really missing up here, but there's some that we didn't.
Dragon.
Dragon's got a little bit of help since then.
Yeah.
We could probably throw Dracloak up here. Reggie Drago is probably another good one too. So those are, again, key consistency pieces for drawing. What are you looking for out of your draw engines? I know you mentioned it already. Like you want more agency over what you're doing with your hand, more choices. Is that what you're looking for from a draw engine in your type of deck?
Yeah, what I'm mostly looking for is a plethora of options because that's where the types that will be the best at CRC we'll talk about that at the end. Um, that's what I'm looking for because if your one draw engine is priced, you're kind of screwed, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but most types do have a lot of options. Sometimes do have none, and sometimes only have one. Like Darkness has the only life part, maybe the Crobat line, but not really. A lot of people play that. But yeah, that's general what I'm looking for. As many consistency cards as possible.
Cool.
We should probably also mention that we're only talking about the Pokemon consistency, right? Because supporter consistency, all decks and types can play, but we're specifically looking at Pokemon which type can play. So
Yeah. And I mean, one of the great things too about, when we're talking about consistency, we're talking about the Pokemon too, is like in an artillery build, if you're drawing up to 5, like you can run more like discard outlets that maybe help you be more consistent in other ways that kind of play into this. Whereas like, I feel like in some fighting lists that I play, like I have to play an effect that might be slightly worse on a card that also gets to draw me cards. Like, Rhyme is a card I strongly consider over something like Boss's Order, because I don't have on board draw. Sometimes my decisions lean towards worse effect draw cards. So again, consistency helps out in a lot of different ways when it comes to deck building, not just, what the Pokemon can do. Well, search, and, Colorless has a couple of search options available to, and you obviously chose not to play them in your list. Like Pelipper is a card, which I've seen you play Pelipper before, and I've seen you try in a couple of different lists.
I did play Pelipper, but that's when the Bastiodon was a thing, and they're trying to shut down all my special energies. But then I was going to play like Pelipper for Hexmaniac, Scoop Up Net, Pelipper, Hexmaniac, then versus Seeker, Hexmaniac. So basically, I just needed to take one KO before the Bastiodon was on, and then I was going to be able to Hexmaniac spam them to get through the effect as many times as needed. That's not a big part of the meta anymore. People put it to the side. So
yeah, Research
that's
Lab kind of killed
yeah,
that a
yeah,
little
yeah.
bit. Became a lot less
Yep.
consistent to get Fossil Mons out, and to Colorless benefit, like it needed any help anyway. But Colorless definitely got a big boost there, while also Archeops going bye, which may be a
Yeah.
little bit of a downgrade. But I do think maybe Colorless still got the better end of that bargain if you think about it. But so again, search options. So you went with draw over search in your deck, but search consistency is pretty key in a lot of different builds, and these are kind of the main ones that we have up here. Shady Dealings, which you get not only on the Inteleon, which gets you 2 trainers, but Drizzile, the stage 1, also grabs you any trainer as well. Gallade and Dragonite both have supporter search from the deck. Macargo is kind of that, but with extra steps. It's any card on top of your deck. You'd have to find a way to get it into hand. And then Grass has a couple different search options. Grass is probably the deck that likes to play the most from the board. So Grottle and Grovyle are both 2 that are going to get you grass Pokemon from your deck, and then Roserade is that piece that just goes and gets you anything. And then Dragon has a similar ability to Grottle here, where you just go grab a Dragon Pokemon. So a lot of different search options available out there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the 2 first pictures up there, the Inteleon and the Gallade, are what every type is hunkering for. I think those 2 lines, especially with the Shady Dealings into Shady Dealings, or the trade into Buddy Catch, that's just ridiculous. That's what every type dreams about. You need to find ways to reuse them, so the Inteleon you can just scoop up nets, and then you can go again Shady Dealings into Shady Dealings. Yeah, I think those 2 are amazing. And then Grass, on the other hand, has a more diverse group. They have the Roserade, like you said, and the Grotle and the Grovyle. They just set up your entire board. That's the Roserade. I probably 9 times out of 10 that's going to get you something rare candy into stage 2, and then the Grotle and the Grovyle are going to get that Pokemon you needed. Um, so not a lot of other. They do have the Beautifly, I guess, for draw, but that's your board gets a little clunky if you're playing Rillaboom, Venusaur, Beautifly, and Torterra. So that's probably why a lot of cross lists do not play it.
Yeah. These cards are bonkers, and we look up here, we mentioned water with Octillery on the other side, and then we're looking at Shady Dealings here. Like it's no doubt that water would be one of the most consistent types in the format. And really, when you look at these 2 pieces, it's hard to find a water build. And there are so many different water builds out there, because these 2 cards really, really help kind of set up any strategy that you're going for. You see them in water-based strategies. You see them in water tank and build strategies. Like they're everywhere. And then, the role compression that Psychic has with Kirlia, that refinement ability, discard 1, draw 2 into the Buddy Catch. It's just like, it's all you need. And then to top that all off, Gallade and Inteleon are 2 really good attackers too. It's like, that's how good these are. Like Aqua Bullet's 120 to the active and 20 to something on the bench, and Gallade is just 160 straight up for 3 energy. So these are, pretty bonkers. Yeah, that's all I gotta say. Yeah.
If you're starting to make a water or a psychic list, I think these 5 cards, so the Intellion line with the artillery, and then the late line, uh, yeah, they're going straight into every build, except if you're playing maybe the Guard of War that doubles the psychic energies. That's maybe only those type of builds swap out the Gallade, but yeah, they're just ridiculous.
So good. Yeah. Give fighting some of these one day. Well, yeah. So the consistency again, super important. Again, you want your deck to be doing not maybe the exact same thing, but kind of have like a core strategy to it, right? Like water wants artillery going, it wants to be searching up supporters with Gallade or drawing cards with Kirlia. Like you always kind of want to get to these core consistency pieces in your game. Well, hey, prizing happens, and we're a singleton format, and so you can mitigate that to some degree, and that's what we're going to talk about now: redundancy. Have multiple copies of cards that do similar things. It's tougher in the Pokemon suite when you look at it, just because of the nature of how Pokemon printings have worked. But usually you make this up a little bit when it comes to what trainers you're playing. So let's talk redundancy. And Jeffrey, in your list, you've got a ton of different, examples of what redundancy is going to look like. And so when you look at your list, one of the core pieces, one of the things that sticks out to most people right away is like you have a ton of switch cards. And, what was your thinking behind having so many switch cards in your list?
Well, it all started when the I was not playing the Swallow yet, but I was playing the Slacking, and the Slacking can't attack the next turn. So you needed to switch it out because the strength of the Slacking is putting it active, shutting down the abilities, then making sure that on the next turn you're still shutting down the abilities, because otherwise, just a simple Hex Maniac with the Snorlax active would be probably just as fine. But it's a consistent shutdown of the abilities that makes it so strong. And that's where you need all the switch outs. Also, the Snorlax putting itself to sleep gets helped a lot with all the switch outs. So that's kind of where it comes from. I love that most of these are consistency cards, and others are, yeah, Guzma is just a staple. It's like we said, to the Intellion is something you're putting in every water list. I think there's no list that doesn't run a Guzma.
These cards are great. Tate and Liza, you mentioned it's a modal card, so you have the option to switch, but you can also just shuffle draw 5, which is really important when you're trying to set up and your hand isn't super great. You're just going to use that second mode. Obviously, I think most of us, when we're winning, are going to be like, yeah, I get to use the switch mode. We're doing it. But Tate and Liza is a really, really, really flexible card, which is one of my favorite things about the majority of your list. Like, you're not running cards for cards' sake. You're just trying to get the most value out of a lot of them. Birdkeeper, similar. It's not modal. You're getting both options. It's a little worse on the rate. You get switch plus a draw 3, but Birdkeeper is a solid card and one of my favorite cards in Gym Leader Challenge as well. Guzma, like you mentioned, just so good. Switch out one of your opponents, switch out one of your own. So strong. But I think where colorless in your build in particular maybe has a little bit of a leg up is special energies. Jet energy is just attached to the bench, switches it to the active. Like, it's crazy that like your acceleration is also netting you basically what a supporter could do in Tate and Liza. And then recycle energy, attach, discard to retreat, it just comes back to hand. You've lost no value. So colorless getting some pretty good rates out of those cards. And of course, you've just got Floatstone and Cyclozar, which you can kind of use here and there as pivots going back and forth. When you're playing your games, obviously you mentioned slacking a lot. Like, what are some other uses you're getting out of all of these switch cards?
One of my favorite things about the deck is the recycle energy. I think it's my favorite energy of all time. It's so insane, that, especially with Porygon. You just when your Floatstone is field lowered away, just push up any one retreat Pokemon, raise a code to recycle energy to it, and then you have a free pivot, right? Because you just get the energy back when you retreat. Um, and also something important to mention, right? Why I love the Cyclozar, because after say your slacking is active, you get the Tate and Liza or the Bird Keeper to switch out the slacking. Then you need to switch back into him, right? So you need the Floatstone, you need the Jet Energy, you need the Cyclozar, uh, just to retreat or push something else active in case of the Jet Energy. Um, So yeah, you need a combination of the switch out and switch in a lot of the times, and that's why you need to play so many,
Hmm.
in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I'm a huge fan of this because when I started playing Pokemon, I was playing a lot of base set, and there's a Dodrio that reduces retreat cost by 1. So it's just like a list where you're like switching back and forth. So I'm a huge fan of all the switch outs. Well, redundancy and switching is great, but you've also accounted for kind of like another, I don't want to say downfall, but maybe a little bit of a weakness in the deck because besides Snorlax, when people look at colorless list, kind of the other basic attackers are a little bit mid, to be honest. Cyclozar's hitting for 100, Kangaskhan hits for 120 after a revenge attack. Lugia is like up in the air about whether or not it's going to be good in certain situations. Well, you've kind of mitigated that by, again, some redundancy in your abilities to boost damage. So you've got Kukui, it's basically muscle band plus you draw 2. Then muscle band itself, you got powerful energy. You're running fighting fury belt. So, in your list, like, is that it? Like, did you want to hit certain numbers? Is that why you included so
Yeah,
many?
very much so. I think every colorless list is going to run the muscle band and the powerful energy, but I think running the Kukui makes a ton of difference because I'm always counting for key HP breakpoints, right? I know if my opponent's going to flip Whalmer, but that's going to evolve into a Wailord, I need to be able to kill it. I need to have a strategy to find a KO on it. And sometimes you need more than one damage modifier to get that KO. And also, after cutting the slacking and go moving to the swallow, you also lose like you said, a lot of because the slacking does 160. Removing that one, your damage output gets decreased somewhat. Um, yeah, I love that you can just play a Professor Kukui, and that's one of my favorite feelings. Your opponent thinks they're safe. Oh, their muscle band and their powerful energy is gone. Special charge has been played. No way they get the KO. Bam, you slam the Professor Kukui, 20 more damage. It has happened so many times. I can guarantee you that. I just love it. Kukui is my guy. You can also versus seeker for Kukui. So that's something you can't really do with muscle band. You can special charge the powerful energy. It's not as instant as just a versus seeker for Kukui. So I think where the power of Kukui for me is that I often feel like when you're looking at whiffing a KO, a lot of people move towards a Guzma or a boss move. Um, but instead of whiffing that KO, why don't you play the damage mod like the Kukui or the Leon and just be able to KO the thing that has a lot of energies on it and is going to wreck your entire board? So that's why I try to have a lot of outs to these damage mods um, because yeah, you need the combination of all of these.
Yeah, I mean, the best form of disruption is just take the KO, right? Like your opponent has invested so many resources into their big attacker, just take it out. Like it's so much better if it's something useful like a Gallade. Like so imagine hitting that 160 break point, which like your Kangaskhan after return is going to do 120, slap a powerful energy on it, Kukui, boom, it's hitting that break point that you need to take the Gallade out. So again, huge buff. And again, something that, a lot of us don't think about when we're building our decks, those certain damage points that we need to hit, those popular mons in the format, the ones that are going to give our deck specifically issues. Jumbo Size Wailord is a card that gives every deck issue. Can you hit 230 in your deck because that's the number you need to hit? Or can you hit 200 and have Hex up? That's what you need to
Yeah.
ask yourself a lot of times when you're playing into a card as good as that in the format. So redundancy is key. Get them KOs. And this is where we talk about what it looks like in other decks. What does redundancy really look like? And you sent me a couple different ways that this looks like. So the first way that we looked at it here was convergence in strategy. So you have hydro pump attackers, and technically everything on the screen here is what we're going to consider a hydro pump. But you got Zarude, Shining Genesect, and Grass that have base damage plus 20 more for each grass energy attached. So they work really well in that grass build because you have energy doublers and Venusaur, or a card that can go and get 2 energy and attach them right away like Rillaboom. So really strong in that sort of grass build. And then you look at the water side, you've got They're hydro pumpers, Lapras, Veluza, Wailord, again, base damage that do more for each water energy attach. And of course, they work really well with Rain Dancers, which we'll talk about here in a second. But, just such consistent pieces. I mean, you see these cards in almost every single water grass deck.
Yeah, I think being able to still execute your game plan, even though your Shining Genesect is priced, oh, doesn't matter. My Zarude is still online. My game plan can just be the same. Just set up the Venusaur, just set up the Rillaboom or gaming, or get that Genesect of the prizes eventually. Same goes for the Hydro Pumper for water. Lose as priced. Oh, I still have my Lapras. I can still go bananas, attach 5 energies. Smack.
It's so good too, like when you look at the water pieces over here too, like they're all like the same, but like they all have like slight differences that make them so useful in different situations too. Like, Lapras really only costs 1 energy to attack. So you can get in some kind of early game damage with Lapras while you're setting up your board that might come in handy later on for something else. Veluza is an energy conserver. So again, you're getting that hydro pump damage, but you get to shoot 2 energy back to something else in case, something happens to one of your key Rain Dancers. And then Wailord, just 200 HP. Like if you're looking like close out games, trade 2-for-1s. Again, we'll talk about comebacks coming up later in a bit, but just, the fact that they have similar vibes, they synergize well together with other pieces too, and then you can just use them in certain situations. It's great. So love it, love it, love it. Again,
Exactly what you're saying, right? They kind of do the same, but not exactly, right? Because they each have their niches where they're gonna shine. Because ability on the Shining Genesect, being able to steal that 1 energy, that might come in very clutch. Whereas the pack call at the start of the game is going to net you some grass Pokemon super clutch. Uh, the Lapras with the Confuse Ray, even a Confusion, has won me games. I'm not going to lie. The energy retention on the Veluza, as you said. So yeah, even though there's a convergence, there's still a difference, and that's why I love it.
yeah, and we're gonna. I mean, you're gonna kind of already. You're probably noticing a trend already. We're talking a little bit about grass. We're talking a little bit about water. We got colorless. We got psychic. I mean, there's so many good types at it. Another way to make sure you've got some redundancy is like, hey, you don't necessarily need things to synergize well as long as you're playing a diversity in strategies, and those cards are kind of powerful enough on their own that they can kind of merit and you can kind of pivot in and out of them as the games come. So this is kind of your baby. We're talking Dark here, and Dark just has like when you look at the cards, not a lot of it works together, but so much of it is just so powerful that Dark is going to pull out the wins, and it can you can change on the fly to what your opponent's giving you. And so here we got Spiritomb, building Spite, puts a damage counter on it. Its attack is 10 plus 30 more for each damage counter. So again, a Pokemon capable of taking KOs by its own. Weavile here, Icy Wind is kind of a funny attack. Put something to sleep, 10 damage. But Evil Admonition is the attack we're looking for. 50 times the amount of Pokemon that have abilities for your opponent in play. Zoroark, which is again another super useful card. Stand in, you can swap places with the active. And then Mind Jack does 10 plus 30 more for each bench damage. Hoopa is Assault Gate. It's your Donker Extraordinaire. If it's switched to the active, you can do 90 damage for 1 energy. And then Guzzlord here, just, 2 dark, 2 colorless. Red Banquet does 120, and you get to take double prize KOs. So is this why, in your head, Dark is such a powerful threat in the format?
I do think so. Talking about diversity, but in some way there's also a lot of similarities, because a lot of these attackers you can power up in one go, right? Anguish Cry, 1 energy. Evil Admonition, 1 energy. Mind Jack, Double Colorless, 1 energy. Hoopa, Assault Gate, 1 energy. Only the Guzzlord, but that's where all your extra energies go. Your Beast Rings, your Raihans, your Dark Patches, that are all going on the Guzzlord. So I think even though there's a lot of diversity, there's still a bit of convergence. And yeah, there's also the nice combo between the standing and the Hoopa. The Evil Admonition and the Zorak kind of also want big benches, right? Because big bench probably means a lot of abilities. But I think the diversity in things that you can pick and choose from is really nice. Just the Assault Gate, the 90 damage with going together with the Guzma, perfect. To get a Octillery, Malamar, whatever. And then you have the guys that can attack for big damage, like the Spiritomb, the Weavile. Zora can even, if there's a full bench, can hit some nice numbers. And then, yeah, the boy Guzzy, um, he's what Dark's all about, right?
Yeah. And I think like when you think of like other strategies too that are kind of all in on this, like I think of like the traditional psychic list as another one that has a lot of diversities. Like there's synergies there obviously amongst them, but like Mimikyu Copycat is such a bonkers into certain decks. The Mewtwo and the Necrozma both fill kind of that basic attacker role when you see them. You've got your great support Pokemon. You've got some lists play Blacephalon as a way to kind of attack the bench on a certain turn or kind of catch up. So like there are other lists out there. Water is another good example like that. You've got Kyogre. We haven't even talked about Kyogre as like 180 to the bench. So like it's another one of those attackers. It synergizes pretty well with the Hydro Pumpers. But diversity and strategies. Again, when you look at the kind of the top list of the format, you're going to notice a couple things. Do these things synergize well? Is there some sort of convergence? Is there a diversity in case something is prized? There are decks too, like, Hitmonbros, which is one of my favorites, Lost Zone Psychic, that are kind of all in on these strategies, but they're not putting up the kind of the same results that some of these other decks are doing, because if something bad happens, it's not going to be the same thing. So having these backup game plans is key.
Yeah, when the Lost City hits, your deck falls in like a card house, right?
Yeah. I need to start telling people that Lost Zone is banned so that they don't play it. Like, I'm going to use my platform for good, so it's not actually banned people, but at some point I'm going to get frustrated when people are playing it, and I'm going to be like, you know what? All right, moving on. Multitude of enablers. So we looked at convergence. We talked about diversity. Well, hey, you need to have multiple things that do the same thing. That's what redundancy is all about. And so we got a couple examples here. And again, Psychic and Water popping back up on the screen. You got Malamar and Xatu, which are both kind of dynamotors. Malamar attaches from the discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Xatu attaches from hand to one of your bench Pokemon, and you get to draw 2 cards, both stage 1s, which are really great. Then you have Gardevoir, which just doubles energy. So like if you're looking to play a deck, like there's a deck out there called Selenic Mirage that is looking to have a ton of energy on certain attackers, you want these cards to help you do it, and having all 3 of them will be key. A lot of decks will run just 2. You need to have more than one in case of poor prizing, early Gust KO, or something like that. Same thing for Water here on this side. Baxcalibur and Blastoise are just straight Rain Dancers attached to any Pokemon with as much water as you like per turn. Frosmoth, a little bit more limited, but it is a stage 1. It can attach water energy to the bench. So, play multiple copies of things that do the same thing.
Yeah, not a lot of people are going to run all 3 of these at the same time. I think I've never seen anyone run Excalibur, Blastoise, and the Frostmoth. But yeah, in some cases, you need the extra piece, because always there are going to be games where you price your Malamar, and how are you going to cycle attackers, right? You're not going to get the 3 energies you need every turn. If your Malamar's priced, and then you're going to be very happy there's a Zato in your deck. Same with the water guys. Especially why I at the start, when the Baxcalibur came out, I ran the Blastoise and the Baxcalibur together, was because I was very high on the Kyogre. But the Kyogre, getting the energies back to hand, leaves your Rain Dancer very vulnerable, and only having the Baxcalibur and the Frostmoth was a little bit iffy. But as the testing has shown, people managed with just these 2, because obviously a stage 2 and a stage 1 is a lot easier to get into play than 2 stage 2s. So yeah, but having the redundancy is so important. You don't want to be caught with one of these guys in your prizes. So
yeah, for sure. And you definitely, you always have your plan A. Like, Water is always going to prefer having Baxcalibur over Frosmoth. But you got to pivot. The middle evolution line is prized. Got to switch to the Frosmoth. Not as good, but, it's better than nothing. Because, there's so many games where I've just seen Water decks not get one of their Rain Dance effects online, and you're just like, this game's too easy if I'm the one playing against them. Feel like Psychic probably has a little bit easier time on that note, just because, again, I think they have a little bit more diversity in what they're trying to do, where the Water decks feel a little bit more in on attaching multiple energies to attackers to get, certain damage buffs and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and Psychic also has the dimension value, right? So that's pseudo extra energy each turn.
Yeah. Yeah, like and then like Raihan plus Dimension Value is like 2 energies plus the attachment from hand. So like even without your Rain Dancer, you can still hit most 3 energy attackers in the same turn, just if you have Buddy Catch Up. Um, moving on, there's more, obviously, multitude of enablers. Rillaboom and Venusaur, which we talked a little bit about with grass already. Voltage Beat gets 2 grass energies from the deck and attaches them to one of your Pokemon. Venusaur doubles them, so this is where those attackers that we mentioned, Zarude and Shining Genesect, really can shine in a build like this. Iron Leaves is a new card that's come out that, needs 3 energy to attack on Revenge. That card likes both of these things to come out. So again, multitude of enablers is always key. Then you got the Dynamotors and Lightning. Just like, it's so great. Like these types are just so good. Their strategies revolve around having these cards that do similar things.
As I think, especially in these two options, you really want to have down both same. Um, in grass, you want your Rillaboom to hit the field first because you need that burst of energies. Once you have a couple of energies, you're going to be going very smoothly, and then the Venusaur can be that extra on top, so you don't need to spam energies on the board every turn. The thing that scares me a lot about Lightning is that a lot of the attackers get rid of the energies, and that, like I said before, that leaves your Dynamotors very vulnerable on the bench. Uh, so you want these two all the time. I don't think there's any Lightning attacking list that doesn't want these on the bench, chilling there, Dynamotoring those energies back. Yeah, very important.
Yeah, and you mentioned lightning can be scary at times because you have these Dynamotors. All your things not only discard energy, like things specifically about Regieleki, but they're all real squishy too. Like your Raikou only has 110 HP, and you just spent a lot of investment in getting that thing to attack, and its attack is bonkers. It's similar to Guzzlord in its vein, a little bit. A little bit weaker in terms of HP, but once your Raikou attacks, it's going to get return KO. Like a Hex or something like that is really going to set you back the following turn. So again, even having multitude of enablers can be tough given what your type is doing.
Yeah, and I know you're a fan of the new Zapdos. I don't know if you have had the chance to test it out. I think it's 190, right?
Yep, 190 for 3. We were going to test it out last night, but something ended up coming up, so we didn't get to
Oh,
stream it. But yeah, the Zapdos is good. I like the Zapdos for 2 reasons. 190 is an important number for a basic to hit. You don't really have to worry about the Luxray being behind on prizes because Lightning can be aggressive, and then I hate to donk people, so I don't want to play the other Zapdos anyway. And I'm a Gen 1er to a certain degree, so I love to play some of the original 151. So that new Zapdos is sweet. But like you mentioned, it discards all the energy. But I'm hoping it dies. Like that's like I put it up there, and I'm hoping it goes. So, but if someone catches me with like a gust, like a Guzma, like hey, like I've just discarded all the energy off of this attacker that requires 3, and then they've just gone Guzma, give me Zeb Striker or one of your Dynamotors. Like I'm kind of out in the water, stranded. It can
yeah.
really suck. Well, again, back to Dark because we got to talk about it. Multitude of enablers. We talked about the cheap attack cost. Well, Guzzlord can be cheap if you think about it, because Guzzlord has lots of ways to be powered up in 1 turn or 2 turns or rapidly, maybe is a better way to say it. B String is a great way. Prize specific card. Your opponent has to have 3 or 4 prize cards remaining, but you get to get 2 basic energy cards and just attach them to one of your Ultra Beasts, which Guzzlord happens to be. Raihan, attach energy from discard pile. Go get another card. Raihan could be energy plus double colorless, and if you happen to have Dark Patch in hand or you have another energy, it's 1 turn Guzzlord, and then Dark Patch is just always super useful too, again for comboing with that or just attaching an extra energy. So just having multitude of enablers. Do you think, talking about Guzzlord up here on screen in all the different ways, are you usually powering up your Guzzlord in 1 turn, or is it taking you 2 or 3 turns to do it?
Most of the time, it will take 2 turns because it's not turn 1. It's basically you have B string and you have the double energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how you do it most of the times in 1 turn. Otherwise, you're going to have to expend a lot of resources. Just attaching darkness energy alone leaves you with 3 energies to attach. Um, So it's mostly a two-turn thing. That's why it's so awesome that all the other attackers are so cheap.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, the real power I think from Guzzlord is if you get to attack with Guzzlord twice, your goal. That's why you need the multiple ways to power him up. I feel like
Mhm. Yeah,
because it.
four prizes, right? If you're thinking two attacks, four prizes. I mean, you gotta shimmy out two others and you win the game.
Yep, yep, yep. I lost one of the recent acing games because I got Guzzlorded twice, and I was I was going to KO the first Guzzlord, and I had the Tate and Liza in hand. I was in my mind I can Tate teammates. I mean for Field Blower because he had the Fighting Fury belt, and I was going to get my Lost City because I was not going to get another two prizes taken away from me, and of course my Lost City was first. So even in the most consistent decks, you're going to get that your prizes are going to hinder you, but that's just Pokemon. That's why I love it. Also, it's also a bit of luck sometimes, and even losing those games, it felt really funny at the time because I knew he was going to come back to haunt me, the Guzzlord. I also, at the end of the game, I end my opponent to two, and of course, those two cards were exactly the two cards he needed to get the gust and the energy. So that was super awesome. So
Bad beats can be good beats sometimes, especially when you're retelling them later on. Um,
absolutely.
do you? I mean, while I've got you on here, do you feel like Dark hasn't been seeing as much play recently? I'm thinking specifically like NAIC. I don't can't recall a list in the top 16 that was Dark. I know it definitely wasn't in the top 8. Is Guzzlord falling off in power level a bit? Do you think that the 120 that it does isn't good enough, or do you think that people just aren't playing Dark as much as they used to?
I think people are kind of trying out some more crazy things, right?
Mm.
That's I think where the GLC has uh, evolved to uh, people playing Seismitoad, water builds, and things like that, going for no energy builds in water. Uh, People are trying out new things, and that's super awesome. And I think that's why Dark, which is a pretty, I mean, the basic Dark builds is like how many cards can you cut from it, right? We were talking about it before stream. Buddy Puffin. No clue. The list feels so tight. You have the basic dark like I played with the wheezing, and then you have the turbo dark with all the donk possibilities. So, and I think after Phoenix stopped playing it, I don't know if he's really stopped playing, but he's less active online with the dark donk deck. But I do still think dark will always be after colorless. Will dark will be my second favorite type, uh, and there's some new cards on the horizon for dark. I'm very excited about. So I'm definitely going to be hopping back, uh, playing with my boy Guzzlord. So yeah,
Perfectly explained, because when I think about it, like when was the last time that Dark got like a cool new card like that
yeah,
60? Like I don't think any list is necessarily solved to a certain degree in Gym Leader Challenge, because there's always people brewing and taking here and there. But like that, the 60 for Dark is kind of like, this is it. This is the best list. Like it's hard to experiment with it, which is why you'll see like a lot of people still trying Crobat out. Like Crobat is still kind of newish. No one's really solved the Crobat list, which is another multi-prizer. But yeah, the Guzzlord list, that's a good way. They're strong, strong. Well, the last little bit about redundancy here that you wanted to talk about was tools and stadiums, and you put it best, Jeffrey. You said so many lists are just playing one good stadium, or they're only playing like one good tool that does a specific thing. One muscle band, one luxurious cape. Well, if you're just running one of these effects, it's almost certainly going to get removed because field blower exists. And field blowers become so much easier to find. Arvin grabs you an item card. Teammates Raihans after a KO are going to be able to just grab you field blower if it's something that you need. So, like, why play one of these effects? You should be playing multiple twos in stadiums, right?
yeah, absolutely. I think if a lot of people their first impressions when they see my list. I think you mentioned it at the start of the pod. Why are you playing so many tools in your dark list? If you see my grass list, is just the same. It's a lot of HP buffing tools for the root and the genesect. Yeah, if you just play one tool, you're just going to get field blowered. I've been experimenting with psychic with. You mentioned the Selenic Mirage,
Mm.
but I've included a Monkidori package with it. Um, I wanted to include a spell tag, but I really did not have any other good tools. I mean, there's always good tools, but you have to fit them into 60 cards
Yeah.
that I wanted to play. So I included the Lana's Lana's Rod.
Yeah.
Just
Ilana, something wrong. Yeah.
just to get the spell tag back. Um, because the first time it can be field blowered, the second time it will probably hit because not a lot of people. I haven't come across a lot of people that play multiple tool removals. I think the only lists that play consistent double tool removal are the Lost Zone Psychic lists, but they just play the Lost Vacuum because they're probably going to Lost Zone their own stadium. Uh, so the extra HP buffing tools, the Lux Cape, the Fighting Fury belt, the Cape of Toughness, the I think it's a balloon or something.
Bravery
Uh,
Charm is another HP
Bravery
buffing tool.
Charm. Yeah, exactly. Uh, if you play all of those, your Pokemon are going to get so big, so tough to KO. It's actually the same for stadiums, right? You're only playing um one stadium will be countered so easily. Stadiums can be countered, of course, by playing other stadiums. Except for Parallel City, you can't counter a parallel with your own parallel the other way, right? Because that's what a lot of people would like to do. That's one way to bait out a field blower, right? Nobody wants to get stuck
Mm-hmm.
with the three bench board state. So that's an easy way to bait out a field blower, and then you can stuck him with the Lux Cape. Yes. Who has the startling megaphone? Who's running the Lost Vacuum? Probably nobody, right?
Probably nobody. And that's, we mentioned that in, I think, last week's episode where we talked about cards that we should be playing. And again, recency bias again. I know I've said this before, but I've been playing against a lot of decks that like to recover their, luxurious capes and play them over and over again. I remember playing against you a little while ago where you were just putting all these HP buffs on your basics. And I was like, I've only got one field blower and you can't get an item back. So, I think we should be considering two options. And again, the list that you mentioned too, Psychic Lost Zone, like, sometimes you're going to put them in an awkward position where they're going to have to, use their Lost Vacuum on something of yours, which is one less card. So even by playing tools like that, it might even be a disruptive piece against your opponent, depending on what matchups you're playing. So play multiple tools in stadiums, force your opponent to use a field blower. And it's really an art, Jeffrey, like playing out your tools at certain times, because you almost always want to try to get one for one with a field blower. Like if you're the person who's getting field blowered, you never want to get two for one. So if you're playing a powerful effect like Parallel City and you have like Luxurious Cape, you kind of want to sandbag it in hand, right?
Absolutely. That's one. I think that's one of the key points that will show people that you're great at GLC, right? Not just playing down your cards as fast as you get them. Oh, I can click this button, bam, slam it down. You need to be able to force out certain cards, force out the gust cards, maybe force out the field blowers, force out the damage buffs. Then after they've used all their damage buffs, then you slap them with the extra Fighting Fury belt or something like that. Because you getting getting rid of two of your opponent's tools at the same time, getting rid of the Float Zone and the Lux Cape, or the Peril City and the Lux Cape. That's how you lose games. I feel like,
Or how you win them.
yeah. Of how you win, depending on which side of the field blower you're on. Exactly.
And that's really important too. In some decks that we're not mentioning up here, they don't have that luxury at times. I'm thinking like if you're a lightning build and you're playing Zebstrika, like you're gonna play your cards out because you're gonna be discarding your hand anyway. So like you might not get to necessarily choose when you throw down your Lux Cape and your Stormy Mountain or whatever stadium you're doing. Like you're gonna be playing your cards out because you're just gonna discard them. But you're losing a little bit of agency or a little bit of, I don't know, like you're losing a little bit of that skilled knowledge that we've learned by playing that card. But you're playing Zebstrika, so that's why maybe
Yeah,
Lightning's not more higher up on this list of CRC. If we were going to give it a scale of 1 to 10 on CRC, where it would be.
yeah, you have to play the Zebstrika. I think is really in first button dot deck. Sometimes it feels like if I Squovit would be really awesome in Lightning. I feel like needing to save those. You never want to get rid of a Raihan, but sometimes you just need to, and able to dash before you sprint. That would be so great for Lightning.
Yeah, if Lightning got that before Fighting got something, though, I might cry. Like, that might be the day. Like, like just give me something, guys. Give me something.
Yeah.
Well, I got a viewer question for us, and Jeffrey, I'm going to lean on your expertise here. When you're looking at building your deck, obviously, how many stadiums are you looking to include? Is it just build specific in your opinion? Are you looking to always include 2? Now, I say this after I looked at your dark list last night because I was looking at it real hard, and you were only playing Artisan. So, what makes you determine how many stadiums you're putting in a particular build?
Yeah, most of the time I would say try to get at least 2 stadiums. One stadium just to bump a parallel city because you're going to get paralleled. Um, and probably a second stadium like a Dimension Valley or something like that. Something you want to have in play as long as possible. Try to keep that resource for you as long as possible. Feels feels good. And the reason there's only one my darkness build is because of the space issue. And for the longest time, I was running the chaotic swell um, just to get rid of other parallels because it doesn't really matter if you play it on top of a parallel, it's great. But if you play it before the parallel hits, also great, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just about getting rid of the parallels. Uh, Now I see a lot of lists are using the swells to get rid of the lost cities.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like the same. But I'd say 2 stadiums is probably least you'd want to run. Maybe more if deck space allows it. Yeah, it's very type specific. Sometimes it's better to run just one stadium and a Lusamine or something like that, or something to. I don't know if there's other ways to recover stadiums. I don't. Maybe
Silene.
Silene, Roseanne's backup, or something like that. Yeah, but they're more convoluted, right?
Yeah, of course.
Um, uh, yeah, some getting to run the high value stadiums. Every deck would want a parallel city. Almost every deck can be an artisan,
Mm.
something like that, just to get you into the game or disrupt if you're in the parallel city.
Yeah, I feel like the only decks that maybe like wouldn't want parallel these days are spread decks because you want your opponent to keep benching. So they're probably running
Yeah,
Silent Lab instead. I think that's like the easy swap between those sorts of decks.
exactly. Decks that spread, you want the silent lab, but you can't play a second silent lab, so you need to play the Silene, right? Course,
Yeah.
they're going to play other things. I think they're the spread likes probably lightning or water, and they have Brooklet Hill and then Stormy Mountains, I guess.
Mm.
So you're always going to run those, but it's pretty like specific, right? There's no real right or wrong answer. Uh, if you're playing Tinglu, I'd say max it out. 6 stadiums, you need all of them.
Yeah, max them out, stadiums, and grab loose. I mean, Ting Lu's been kind of bonkers. I'm gonna be honest. I mean, the
Yeah,
shout out to Mickey who just won Wednesday night's North American tournament with his fighting spread list. But that Ting Lu 30 damage on a basic for 1 energy as long as you have a stadium in play. Like so good. And then fighting's got some of like the kind of cooler niche stadiums. Like there's the one that discards the fighting energy to draw cards. You've got Silent Lab. You've got Brooklet Hill. You've got the Dojo, which increases damage. Like there's so many cool fighting things, and it can even help you with draw because you're fighting, so you need it. Like you might be playing Pokestop or the Rose Tower. Just play them all in Tinglu list.
I think the Fighting Dojo is one of the least explored cards in all of GLC because every type could use it. Just imagine your Guzzlord when you're behind on prizes doing 40 more damage. People start crafting.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's
It,
super
it's
sick.
it's not fighting Pokemon specific. It just needs to have the fighting energy. And we're going to for shout outs. We're going to see Matthew's list, which inspired my Porygon list. You're going to see the fighting energy. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I know people right now are running to check strong energy. Whether strong energy is any Pokemon or fighting, it's only fighting people. So your strong energy isn't going to work in that. Well, all right. Before we talk the last piece, which is comeback, which I think is my favorite of all of these pieces, and that's also the piece I think that we don't see the most. I think it's time we talk about the deck of the week, and we got to give a shout out to Wither Gaming 001, who submitted this list, and we finally got around to submitting it. I'm going to be honest, I'm not the strongest when it comes to my knowledge of control decks, but Wither Gaming wrote like an entire article about it, and they included the Google Doc in the deck list. So I'll make sure to include that in the details down below. But they wanted everyone to know how sweet Fairy Routes Control is. Now, before we start, have you ever played, Jeffrey, against the Fairy Control list?
I have played against fairy control lists in the past, but those always all the time I would either dark or slacking colorless.
Mm.
Those felt like free matchups because you just shut down the abilities, right?
Yeah, shut down the
But
abilities
yeah,
and then having a ton of switch. I feel like any decks that
yeah,
have like a ton of switch are going to be really, really good into a lot of control strategies. Like I think I played Hitmonbros into a couple of control strategies, and they're trying to kind of like boss stall or counter catcher stall you to a certain degree. And your lists are known for it. Hitmonbros is known for it. Just play Birdkeeper, Tate and Liza, have a Floatstone ready. You know, these cards are going to kind of help you with the control matchups.
at UIC this year, I was going into the last round. I faced Shocklock. I was playing my colorless build, and I was like, "This is free. I just need to attach the energy, wait till I draw the switch out. Okay, I take the KO. Another switch out, take the KO." But that's kind of how you beat some of these more control lists, having a lot of switch outs, as you said. So yeah, control can be a menace, but the big problem is the time limit, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's where I think fairy control, like when you look at the best fairy list, like obviously I need to probably say the disclaimer: hey, fairy is a type you can play in Gym Leader Challenge, but there's no longer printing any cards as the fairy type. They're now psychic type. So I am choosing to include Routes Control up here, knowing that there are no new fairy cards. People love fairy, so if you're really, really invested in GLC already and you love fairy, try this deck out. You will never get a friend playing this list. Let me go ahead and say that. You will never, ever, 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 ever have friends when you play control decks consistently, but maybe they'll like you enough and still invite you around from time to time. But this list is pretty sweet. Looking through Wither Gaming's kind of, outline that he sent out, he's mentioning that the Florgus line is the most important to get out. So the Florgus lets you flip a coin to get item cards back. And since a big part of your strategy is just putting up Lily's Pokédoll or Robo Substitute into the active to kind of make your opponents take KOs without getting any prize cards, getting those cards back off a coin flip is pretty important. Now, the second kind of important thing that you're trying to do is get up your Slurpuff, which lets you draw a card. If it's in the active, you get to draw 2 cards. So having your Slurpuff with a recycle energy on it, so you can go into the active, draw 2 cards, retreat, get that energy back, or a U-turn board, is kind of the second most important thing you can do with this list. Then you're looking to kind of get your control pieces set up from that point on. You're using Rabombi to protect your bench because you don't want Slurpuff or Florgus to go down. You've got Mr. Mime as a bench barrier, kind of the same idea. You don't want to lose to spread decks. And then while you're doing this, you're going to be disrupting your opponent with your different item cards, your discard cards, all these certain things. You've got Lieutenant Surge to help you play multiple in a turn, to help you recover and play immediately. You're hoping to maybe bench lock your opponent too. You've got Erica's Invitation here that's kind of cute, so you can kind of get your opponent in a locked situation as you're discarding cards through their deck. And then Wither Gaming here has opted to go with this Routes, who for 1 energy will get a supporter back from your discard pile as kind of an added consistency piece to what they're trying to do. So this deck is all about stalling, milling out your opponent, disrupting them along the way. And like I said, Jeffrey, you're just not getting any friends with this list.
No, but it's nice to see they're not getting new Pokemon, but they're definitely getting new trainer cards because I'm spotting the Erica's Invitation and the Eerie. I can imagine those two cards make a giant difference. Uh, Eerie getting rid of the opponent's item cards that might be able to stop your game plan, and the Erica's Invitation pulling up um, something your opponent doesn't want to get stuck in the active.
Yeah.
So I think Fairy, even though there's not going to be any new Pokemon, the decks will still evolve. I don't really see what cards they could have cut to squeeze in the Airy and the Erica's Invitation because as you said, I'm not so locked in on the Fairy control decks. But yeah, those two make a big difference, I feel like.
Yeah. And if you want to know more about, the invitation card or about fairy control in general, hit up, Wither Gaming 001. He's in the Cardboard Discord. He's also in the, I think, Tricky Gym and the All About That Beige Discord. So hit him up, all of those things. Ask him questions. He'll know more than we will. We're just kind of going off his guide. And he spent a lot of time with this. I felt like we should talk about his deck because it's super sweet, but I would never want to play against it. The last thing I'll say about it before we move on is his build is a little different because he actually has ways to take KOs in certain situations. He's playing the Copycat Mimikyu plus counter energy in case he does need to take a KO because of poor prizing or maybe kind of stop something important that his opponent is doing. And the same thing with the Xerneas here, who does have the lead attack, which is really great for consistency, but for 3 energy can also do 130. So again, he's got different ways that he can take KOs if he needs to, but again, it is a stall strategy, so that's what it's trying to do most of the time.
Yeah, sometimes taking the KO is very important, right? That's something people that build spreads decks or sometimes also forget, that sometimes you just need to get a prize card. Something you need will be priced, and you can't wait till everything's built by the spread, right? Sometimes you just need to get that KO. In this case, with the Mimikyu and the Xerneas. So I really, really like seeing those in the deck list.
Yeah, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, people look at their spread list and they're like, it's all spread. But like, what happens when that doesn't work out? What happens when you can't get around bench barrier? And that's why, like, when you look at my Hitmon list or when you look at my Dusknoir list, like, I'm running cards like Gallade can take a KO, a card like Giratina can take a KO. Having, we talked about it, divergence in strategies is really going to be important for a list. So that's why we brought you on, Jeffrey. Well, all right. Comeback. Can we come from behind and win the game? And this is where, like, people looked at your list, Jeffrey, and they were like, what's going on here? And you, through your iterations of what your colorless list has become, have included different options for your comeback potentials throughout. And so the one that won you the championship was including this Swellow, which, again, you look at it, it's 2 energy, Peck does 30, 3 energy, Wing Attack does 50. So, not a powerful card on the stage 1 first attack. Energy costs are high. There are better cards, but it has the Delta Plus ability, which means that if you take a knockout, you get an extra prize card. So it is a 2-for-1 prize card, and you can pair this with other cards. I think this last iteration, you've gone with Crisis Punch as your way to best utilize it. I've seen it with Blindside and other lists. I've also seen people mess around with Bunnelby, which can attack twice, and I've seen them kind of use it in a similar vein that the Swellow does here. Why Swellow over Bunnelby?
Well, it's for now because I've already cooked up a list that's with the fan Rotom that will come out, and I had to make some cuts. So I swapped out the Swallow for the Bunnelby because I needed that extra space. But my logic for playing it right now is because sometimes the damage you can do without the Crisis Punch is just enough. Like I said before, the killing a Spiritomb, free. Killing another Dodrio, free. And sometimes with a Kukui or a Muscle Band and a powerful energy, you can boost a Wing Attack to 90 damage or something like that. or get a gust with the two tools. So sometimes the small amounts of damage you can do, even though they're very expensive, can just take you the double price KO without the crisis punch. And that's where the Bunnelby uh, is a bit less active. Um, but the Bunnelby, on the other hand, does make the TM evolution a lot better. So if you're playing TM evolution, Bunnelby is a lot better than Swallow because a double TM evolution straight into a slacking or a Porygon, that GG's.
Yeah. It's
That's
so, so good. And I was wondering if you were playing the Swallow because, Skwovet is kind of like seen in almost every other single turbo colorless list. And Wing Attack only does 50, but like every other colorless list is going to be running a 60 HP Mon. And like you mentioned, one muscle band, one powerful energy. You're almost guaranteed at least one KO even without the use of a TM. Probably what you're considering to be the most common matchup in a big tournament. So I thought that was maybe one of the reasons why you opted for the Swallow.
Yeah, absolutely. And also against the new Cleffa, a lot of psychic lists run. Uh, they use it as a free retreater often, so it stays on the board. Um, but then you can just kill it with the Swallow, get two prizes. It didn't happen in the tournament, but it's something to keep in mind. Um, yeah, that's it on the Swallow, I think. It's also a levelable, searchable, so nothing to forget. So
Yeah, and just even thinking like Cleffa is like a 30 HP Pokemon, which is probably Psychic is probably one of your harder matchups in all honesty because Mimikyu or not Mimikyu is pretty good in that matchup,
yeah,
and then also Marshadow, limiting your hands after you've built them up to a certain degree can be tough. So having a way to get rid of it. That's actually I don't play that Cleffa because I do think that prize is just too free. But I get it if you're really trying to first turn Marshadow, having a free draw up to 7 card or shuffle draw 7 card is maybe important, but it's going to be
yeah,
Swallow
it's
fodder in the future.
yeah, Swallow fodder or Spelltech fodder or Monkey Dory fodder, or it's an easy two price swing. So I'm also not really sold on it yet, but
Mm-hmm.
after the turn one Marshadow, you kind of need it sometimes.
Yeah, I feel you there. And then your other options here were Slacking, which we've talked about a ton because it is just such a sweet card. And when I got introduced to Porygon Z, like this was the card that I was like, that card is bonkers. Then you even kind of forget Snorlax exists at times because Slacking is a very, very powerful card on its own. But Slacking's lazy ability here, as long as it's your active, all of your opponent's Pokemons don't have abilities except for lazy. And then critical move, just really, really strong attack too. It's 3 energy, does 160. You discard an energy and you can attack. But the discard doesn't matter because you're running recycle probably. So you just discard recycle, comes back to hand. And then your list is just running so many switch options that, you just switch it back. The effects of attack are removed when something is switched to the bench. And then you can just attack the following turn.
Yeah, exactly. In my opinion, Slacking is probably still the better comeback option, but it's just a lot harder to set up than the Swallow, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a stage 2. Uh, I think it's probably the best stage 2 for colorless as an attacker. Um, because yeah, shutting down abilities is so devastating on your opponent. And 160 is just enough to hit a lot of numbers, especially with the damage mods you can run. You don't need to play Hexmaniac because you're already slacking, so you can perfectly play a Kukui. That's 180. Um, so yeah, slacking is crazy.
Yep. And for the turns that you don't have Slacking, and something that Colorless has gotten better at through the years, or at least as they've gotten more draw power, is just having Hex Maniac on command. It just feels like Colorless is one of the better types, even without specific supporter search, about finding Hex Maniac and playing it to shut off your opponent. We've already talked about some great uses. Your opponent has used Kyogre to do 180 to something, energy's back into hand, Hex Maniac shut off their Rain Dancers for the following turn. Pretty good.
Yeah, that can be devastating, and I think at that point, the Turbo Snorlax build is probably a bit better at spamming Hexmaniac than the Porygon slacking builds. Um, Yeah, but Hex Maniac spamming is crazy. I saw the Discord about one of the lists at NAIC, and um, somebody was testing it and was with the Mewtwo, putting it back, drawing into it, Hex Maniac again versus Seeker Hex Maniac. Like that's just devastating on your opponent. So
Yeah, that NASC list is super sweet. Like the using that Mewtwo, because other people are running the Mewtwo that does 90 plus 90 more if your opponent has 3 or fewer prizes, but like that Mewtwo is 180 is a number that other psychic Pokemon can hit too. So using the Mewtwo that puts a supporter back on top of your deck is just so busted. So I'm surprised I hadn't really seen that used before. But we're gonna talk NAIC next week, so I'm gonna hold off on that.
all right.
But yeah, this is sweet. Other decks that got comeback potential. Obviously Colorless has huge comeback potential. I'm going to be honest, most Colorless decks don't need the help in most matchups, Jeffrey. I mean, if we think about it, like, Snorlax is a pretty good 2-for-1 trader by itself. And then if you just keep, KOing every turn, which it feels like Colorless is pretty good at, they're just going to win on prizes without the comeback. But having the comeback is nice. But other types need some help, and Dark is one of them. We talked about Red Banquet already. 2 Dark, 2 Colorless, 120, and it takes an extra prize if that opponent was knocked out. Raikou was also mentioned. It's got a funky energy cost here. You can mitigate a bit with things like counter energy, Raihan to attach, use a Dynamotor, and then attach from hand is another way. Again, running tons of special energy to help out with that Raikou. 120 to the active, 120 to the bench. My favorite Delta Plus Articuno here, which does the same thing that Swallow does, but it's on a basic. Just imagine if you had this in Colorless, how much better it'd be, but this Articuno is pretty nuts.
Yeah.
And then Bunnelby that we talked about too. So you'll notice a lot of ancient trait Pokemon on the list because that Delta Plus and that Barrage attack to attack twice is a huge comeback, especially when you pair them with the TMs. And then, of course, any 2 prize attack like Raikou and Guzzlord is just so good too.
Yeah, I think especially the first 2, the Guzzlord and the Raikou, are not really seen as comeback cards. But with comeback, I generally mean like if you're behind on prizes, how can you still win? Because sometimes if your opponent takes the first prize and you just go 1-for-1 each turn, you're just going to end up losing. And if your deck is not built for jumping ahead in the prize trade, um, then yeah, you're lost from the start actually. So that's kind of where the comeback in this sense come from. But like you said, the ancient traits, every type I think almost has an ancient trait. So there's a lot to be. I'm trying to make the Medicham work with the Blindside and the Peloscent, but it lacks a bit of consistency. So
Yeah, no, poor fighting. That Medicham is so sweet.
yeah.
I've tried it out so many times, and you have like one Guzma Hala gets you everything you need because you need the triple energy, the triple acceleration energy, plus like a blindside, and it can just go bonkers or just crisis punch too. But fighting, I think the new card's a stadium and the new Colress that's coming out, which is a stadium and a special energy, because you can just play Town Store as another way to get redundancy, so it can get you that tool if you need to. So I think with that, you're going to see a lot more, ancient trait combos become more playable, become more plausible. And then, we might play Lana's Fishing Rod, that card you mentioned earlier on, as like another way to kind of recur those. Because I've had games where I've used this Articuno Blindside 2 times, and it's just sick. It's just one of my favorite things to do. So be on the lookout for that. Comeback cards are fun. They're fun, and we should all be playing them. Do you think every list should have a comeback attack mon in them?
They definitely should try to fit one in. Not all of them are going to be like these ones. They take the 2-for-1 price trade. Sometimes you need other types, but we'll get to that. But I definitely think that every type should look at how am I going to be able to swing the price trade, be it by taking prizes or denying prizes.
Yep. Well, other ways that decks are kind of trying to make this comeback are, hand disruption. And hand disruption is fairly common. We got N and Iono on screen. Marnie, to a lesser extent, giving your opponents 4 cards at a certain time of the game is definitely acceptable, especially when you're setting up. If they only have 1 or 2 prizes left, is 4 cards going to be enough for them to continue doing what they're doing? Maybe. So In and Iona are definitely the more powerful comeback cards. And Reset Stamp, which is always a fun one to see your opponent play against you. Reset Stamp is, shuffle your hand into your deck and draw equal to prize cards. It's basically In, but on an item card. So some options that deck has, Marshadow might be put up here again as a way, especially if your opponent has the win in hand. But, comeback, disruption, draw supporters, always key.
Yeah, they're very, very important. I think every list is probably running the N and the Iona, or maybe they cut one of the two and then add a Marnie. You just need them sometimes. At the end of the game, when all else fails, just try to reset your opponent to one card and make them have it. That's sometimes just what you have to say. Just show me the cards. And exactly the same with Reset Stamp. Not a lot of lists run it, but getting to play a N type of effect and also play a Gust or a Hex Maniac is even more devastating. So that's definitely something to look out for if you have the space.
Yeah. Space is always the issue when it comes to Reset Stamp, and it's one-sided too.
Yeah.
Well, some other mons, again, we talked about, attacking mons. Not that these cards on the screen aren't great attackers, but these are definitely kind of unique within their types, ways to make a comeback. You have Garchomp, which is already on that Gabite that we mentioned in the consistency piece that can search up dragon Pokemon for you. Well, it evolves into Sonic Slip Garchomp, which basically lets it be immune from damage during the following turn and effects of attack. So even something like Sableye couldn't get after it. And then on top of being immune for that turn cycle, and it's something that can't be hexed during your opponent's turn after you've played it, because Sonic Slip is like a static effect on the battlefield. But so it's really useful in situations like that. It's also a great attacker. Dragon Blade, which is double dragon energy compatible here, a water and a fighting, is just 160. So not only is it a good way to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? A good way to kind of preserve your attacker for the following turn, but you're trading 2 for 1 on KOs because it's going to take a KO. Dragapult, similar, 2 energy, does 120 and then 3 damage counters to the bench. Infiltrator, a little bit riskier. I'm not a coin flipper myself, but I do love me some Dragapult. But Infiltrator is flip a coin. If heads, you prevent all damage. It's on 150 Pokemon, or 150 HP Pokemon, so it's not the thickest boy out there, but it definitely can survive a hit or there. Slap a Luxurious Cape on this thing and just watch your opponents cry as you flip 2 or 3 heads as you go. And then the last one here is Espathra with Stance. If you evolved it that turn, it's immunity through the next turn, and then it's got a decent attack. If Tulip is in your graveyard, it's 70 plus an additional 70.
So yeah, I think the key thing here is that they're both, all 3 of them are reasonable attackers. Maybe the Spathra is kind of iffy because you need the Tulip, but the other 2 are definitely very clutch attackers, and nobody wants to skip a turn when your opponent evolved via the Sonic Slip. And you kind of need to get an escape rope, boss, Guzma, or something like that. And really nobody wants to attack into an infiltrator, because getting a fail on that is just awful, especially if you have to 2-hit KO it. So the 150 makes it out of range of your attack. And then you need to hit 2 head flips, 2 tail flips actually, because I think the heads is prevented damage.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that just feels awful. But of course, there are going to be those games where you think, okay, of course my opponent is going to hit. Of course, it's going to hit heads, right? I'm going to survive, and then it gets obliterated from the field, and then you invested all these resources into a stage 2. Yeah, it's an option. It's an option.
Yeah, I'm partially happy that a lot of lists have been dropping Dragapult in favor of Tinkaton, which is a great attacker and a great support. Again, roll compression is great in GLC, but man, there is not a lot or a worse feeling than double tailsing a Dragapult or triple tailsing and just repeatedly having this Dragapult stall you, which I've seen it do multiple times before.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other way, be big. Be big, have lots of HP, and take KOs. You've got jumbo-sized Wailord, which takes 30 less damage from attacks already with 200 HP. And then for 4 energy, one of them has to be a special for it to do the additional damage, but it's 120 plus 120. So just the beefiest Mon in Gym Leader Challenge, I think. There might be something that has more HP, but I think Wailord just takes the cake in terms of everything that it can do. Torterra is another good one. There are obviously ways that you can mitigate Torterra's effectiveness, like a parallel can reduce its damage, but it's still 190 HP, which is a pretty difficult ceiling to reach. And then Evo Press is just 2 energy, 50 more for each evolution, and Grass is really good at filling up their bench. If you're, a little bit less on HP, or even if you want to just increase that HP, something like Luxurious Cape or those other HP buffing tools that we mentioned, or maybe even HP or damage reduction stuff like Pot Helmet, or you can play Levanian Grass. These are all ways that you can kind of help yourself trade 2 for 1. Just don't get Gust KO'd with some of your smaller. Stop benching at some point.
Yeah, for sure. Don't let those HPs totals mislead you, because they're never going to be just 200 or never going to be just 190. It's always going to be more. There's going to be those Cricketoons, there's going to be those Levanis, there's going to be the Pot Helmets. You need to be able to shut those down, remove the tools. If you're going to want to KO these beefy boys, and as you said, they're awesome attackers. With the Evo Press and the special wave, and also the other Wailord, the Hydro Pumper is also 200 HP. So yeah, if you can't go 1 for 2 or 2 for 1, make your opponent go 1 for 2 on your side. So get those beefy boys out there.
Yeah, for sure. And even like, in some matchups, the Luxurious Cape is just too free. Like I'm thinking like Lost Zone Psychic or Psychic Spreadless that are trying to KO with damage counters. They don't get the extra prize off of Luxurious Cape. So sometimes you're just like, your Wailord is going to go 6 for 1 in prizes, or just take all 6 after you set it up on the second turn of the game. Again, the way that I see most people lose once they've had a Wailord or a Torterra set up is just like they overbench, and I'm just going after all the little tiny stuff. And if I can go after the other stuff, and get 6 prizes that way, that's what I'm going to do. So if you're playing one of these tank and build strategies, be careful about your benching.
Yeah, and also be careful about your Luxcapes, because a misplaced Luxcape can also swing the price trade in your opponent's favor, right? Because maybe you're a bit too eager on attaching the Luxcape to the Torterra, but your opponent needed to hit KO it anyway, and the extra 100 HP didn't really matter, so it's still a 2-hit KO, then you're just giving away 1 free prize, right? So you really need to think about, what numbers can my opponent hit? Is it worth attaching the Luxurious Cape? If so, absolutely do it. If it's still a 2-hit KO, don't even try it.
This is where like I'm a huge fan of just sometimes throwing the Luxurious Cape on my support mon that I think is probably worth 2 prizes. Like I often think that
Absolutely.
like Octillery with 190 HP is probably at some point in any one of my games worth 2 prizes. Same with Gallade. Like I'd much rather it be there than like Wailord or Torterra that's like out in the middle of the fire getting like hit into. So, if they gust up one of your support Pokemon with a Luxurious Cape, they're always going to have to 2-hit KO it typically. So that's where I stick my Luxurious Capes, but I've also lost to a Snorlax Luxurious Cape before too. So, attach it where you need it to be. It's all contextual. Just
absolutely.
Know what your opponents are doing.
Almost half the games I attach the Lux Cape to my Porygon Z just to protect it, so wherever it's needed, right?
Yep, wherever it's needed. Well, other comeback ways, we talked about them briefly already too when we talked about our stadium segment, but Parallel is just so good. Parallel can be pretty good like both uses too. Parallel, you can limit your opponent's bench to just 3 spots if you face it towards them, but you can also reduce damage. So I've sometimes seen it used by people that are playing into spread matchups, like play it on themselves so they can get rid of, damaged mon so that they don't give up easy KOs, because you don't lose any prizes off of Parallel City. So it's a useful card both ways. And then Lost City here, just like getting rid of something forever is one of the most busted things that you can do in Gym Leader Challenge. And there's so few ways to actually do it, especially when it comes to like Pokemon or things in the discard pile. So Lost City is so great. It's just whether or not your deck can afford it, right?
Yeah, you need to make sure that you have more attackers available than your opponents. If not, I wouldn't touch Lost City. Think maybe decks like Grass, they really want to recycle their three good attackers, the Root, Genesect, maybe soon the Tapu Bulu or the Torterra. You want to recycle them as many times as possible, and then playing a Lost City might just set you back if it sticks into play. Because if you play it, your opponent can also abuse it. Right? It's a double-edged sword. Whereas Parallel City is a bit more the one who plays it will always get the desired effect, right? So like you said, sometimes it's limiting your opponent's bench, but getting rid of the damaged mons has saved me a couple of games. Not gonna lie. So
Yeah. These stadiums, parallel, I think is pretty fair. If I'm going to point to all things, like every list can play parallel and be pretty effective with it. Lost City just feels unfair sometimes, or unfun is maybe the better word for it, because there's so much Pokemon recovery. We want to be using our favorites so many times, but Lost City is so good at getting rid of something again forever, which is something that you just can't do in this game. So like Sableye and Lost Zone Psychic, if you get rid of that one card, Lost Zone Psychic can just never win. So like if that is dominating your meta, play Lost City. You will not even have to worry about making a comeback. You'll just win.
no, exactly. It's maybe an unfun card, but you gotta do what you gotta do.
Right. If you're playing competitively, play Lost City. That's if your list can afford it. Well, ability lock is pretty busted too. Again, your opponent or yourself might be relying on a couple of key abilities to kind of keep them streaming attackers. If you look at like, fighting lists that play Colossal, for example, their active probably has 3 energy attached to it. Well, if you're able to, KO that active mon with 3, then the Colossal can't attach energy the next turn. You're in a pretty good position. So having the slacking that we talked about, Wobbuffet, Galarian, Weezing, which are all just ability locks in play, is really strong. And then Hexmaniac is just one of the best at staging comebacks.
I think the Wobbuffet and the Weezing probably are a bit harder because they're not as effective if you don't get the KO, right? You really need to make sure that you get the KO on the turn. You push them active, probably by attacking into something that already has damage on it, because the Psychic Assault is great into that, and the Severe Poison only doing 4 damage counters. It's not the highest damage output. That's why the slacking is crazy, because it can take the KOs on its own. Yeah, shutting down abilities can break your opponent's entire game plan. Um, that's how you come back.
Yeah. And I think the Wobbuffet and the Weezing are probably better to like put in the active early so that you get set up. Like obviously they can help you set something up later on in the games, but like if you have a full board and your opponent can't use Grotle or Grovyle to search out Pokemon, or they can't play Drizzile to get in Irida on a certain turn, like they're just busted. Like they're very good at helping you kind of get ahead early, whereas slacking, like you mentioned, is the way to come back. Well, that's our CRC talk. So consistency, redundancy, comeback. What types do you think do it best? I mean, obviously, we've talked a ton about these types on the screen. Is there one that you think is the best at it?
I think the best at it is Water, because it has both the raw draw and the search options with the Octillery and the Intellion lines. I think every type would love to have the combination of those two. Um, Combine that with a card like Irida, which is basically shady dealings into free stage 2. That's just amazing. That's every type wants that. And then I think next to that we have Psychic, and then I think Colorless are right behind Water. Um, they have um, Psychic has a bit of both the search and the draw, but there's the draw is a bit weaker than water, I'd say, because you have the Curlia refinement and the Satu can also draw you cards. There's also Marshadow, but so um, that's a lot of options actually. So maybe Psychic is a little bit better if I think about it now. Um, but yeah, no shady dealing. So I think shady dealing takes the cake. Then you have Psychic, and Colorless has just a lot of just draw cards. There's a couple of cards we haven't mentioned yet. The Pidgeotto, it's like the Dracloak. Uh, Look at two cards, shuffle one to the bottom of the deck, just draw the other one. Um, a lot more options there. Um, but it's all kind of more in the just draw cards, no search. And then on the other end of that, we have grass, which is only search almost, so most of the time, because not a lot of people play the Beautyfly because of bench space issues. Um, so those two are next to that. So I'd say water for sure number one. Intellion is the best card in GLC. I'm pretty sure. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I think in a vacuum, I would agree with you like 100%. Like I think water has all the tools it's ever needed. I like if you were to ask me best deck in the format, like the fact that Psychic can just shut down Inteleon and Drizzile with a Wobbuffet on turn 1 or 2 is puts it a step above. Like it might not be as good at CRC potentially as Water is, but it does have the best matchup into a lot of the other more consistent types, and it can shut off to a certain degree their consistency engine. So I think that for me maybe puts it a notch ahead. But yeah, Water Inteleon is so busted. Why would they print that, and then why would they print it twice on the same evolution line? Like why?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Um, well, that's it, man. That's CRC. Consistency, redundancy, comeback. Water does it best. That's great. So let's get into some shout outs here. I know you've got a shout out to give.
Yeah, I want to shout out to my friend Matthew. He was the one who started playing with me GLC IRL. He gave me a lot of inspiration for the Porygon Slaking build. He was piloting that back when I was still on Darkness, and he kept beating me. He's still beating me till this day. He's my biggest rival, but I love playing against him. We always have these amazing games. Um, this was his last list. He isn't so active anymore, but he still loves GLC. I talk with him GLC, crazy ideas all the time. So big shout out to him for getting me kind of hooked at GLC. So
Nice. Shout out to him because without him, we probably would not know about all your sweet list or have this sweet acronym, CRC. Another huge shout out to Cardboard Warriors here. They have their summer championship that came out. You won the spring championship, so you're kind of like the reigning champ going into this. Are you planning on playing, Jeffrey?
I will be playing, yes. If no nothing special happens, I will be there, trying to defend my title, trying to go back to back. But it will be difficult.
Yeah.
There are a lot
Well,
of great players.
on an unrelated note, if you were to beat your deck, your colorless deck, what deck list would you play into it? Again, unrelated to the championship coming up.
I think I think the new Ting Lu is free, right? It's
Yeah,
Lugia can be good, but 30 everywhere all the time. That's scary.
yeah, that is pretty rough because the Palisand is, if we're talking redundancy, back to it, the Palisand is basically that on an evolution line. Um, yeah, that's
And and
interesting.
their HP is pretty good because the Hitmon combo you can just KO them back. So if you start a price trade, uh, you might be able to win the Hitmon top. That will be a rough one.
Mm,
But the 130 HP, you don't want to have all your mons on your bench, but you're going to have to need them because you need that Kangaskhan with the damage boost. You need to draw all the cards to be able to KO him. With the Hitmons, you don't need all the resources all the time, so you can be a little bit more careful about benching them early. Uh, yeah, Palossand. Pelcent and Ting Lui are scary.
Yeah, and that it's always tough to talk about fighting as a potential, like, I don't know, like tech deck against maybe what's the back deck in the format, because like you still have to make it through the Swiss, right? And like if you're thinking Ting Lu and you're thinking Palisand, like those builds, like just one psychic deck ruins your whole day, right? Like
Yep.
bench barrier Mew, plus you're gonna have to get rid of your own silent lab and they can just recover Mew again, and like all your stuff is weak. So I don't know. I feel like, again, obviously, I'm not going to be playing. I wish I could be playing, but I think if I were going to be playing, I think I would drop down Psychic. This also might be your last opportunity to play
Yeah.
Mars Shadow. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe not. But I
I
think
do I do think that Psychic is going to take this one.
someone just
I
has
have
to
a
play it, right? Like that's
Yeah,
that's the issue.
that's a problem with the last one. I think if Psychic was more represented in the last tournament, it would have taken it home. I feel because it has some great matchups.
Yeah, and it has to be the Psychic list that doesn't just fold the Snorlax, because like everyone wants to play Lost Zone Psychic these days, and Lost Zone Psychic just can't do anything to Snorlax without Hex or Mimic You. So I think you just have to play like a good old traditional Gallade, maybe Tinkaton, maybe Dragapult. I do think Dragapult still might be like the better option. You know, I think Tinkaton is great. Don't get me wrong, but Dragapult's just kind of swingy in good moments. So I kind of like the Dragapult a lot. But yeah, cool. Yeah, Summer Championship. So the details are July 13th, 12 p.m. Central Time. It's going to be in the Cardboard Warrior Discord. It's sponsored by Heavily Played, so there is a $100 prize pool for all the winners. All you got to do is register on Limitless, submit a deck list in advance. Colored proxies are allowed, so you don't have all the cards yet. You don't have all that stuff from Twilight, Masquerade. You want to try the new Monkey Dory. You can put those things, just print them out in proxies and play them. It's super sweet. I think it's probably going to be similar to the last round, where I think it was a 5-round Swiss cut to top 4. So you're probably looking, if you're going to be playing against Geffrey, you're probably looking for maybe a good 6 to 7 hours commitment on Saturday. But yeah, that's where we're at with that. So good times to be had.
Gotta be in that grind mindset to take home one of these. So
That's always my issue with a multi-round gym leader challenge tournament, is do I have the will to go all the way? Once
yeah,
I think I played traditional psychic to like my second gym leader challenge ever tournament, went 4-1 in the Swiss, lost to a donk on colorless as my only bad matchup. Got to the top 4 cut, and I was just like, let's get a cookie and go home. And so we just went home. We drove in an hour, but I was just like, I don't think I want to play anymore. Let's just go home.
no,
The cookie was good though, so it was worth it, I think, in the long run. So
yeah, your brain can definitely be fried after running so many rounds of GLC in a row. But
yeah, best of 3 GLC too. Oh, it can be like those top 4 cuts can be tough at times. My brain doesn't work that way anymore. I'm too old now, Jeffrey. I'm too old for that. Last shout out, I'm going to do a bit of self plugging. Hey, I got a Patreon. So if you're interested in supporting all the things that we do here, I would appreciate it. Take a look at that. You can also subscribe to my Twitch, YouTube. We're not there yet. If you are a member of my Patreon, I got an article up there. I'll be doing an article a month for you guys to read. I got these cool promos. I know the card might be banned, but we got Marshadow. They got the Let Loose on the back that I'll be giving these out. If you want to let loose promo, they feel just like a real card, so you could proxy them up in your deck and play them. But you're looking to support me, I'd appreciate that. Hopefully that trickles down to Jeffrey in some way. I don't know, but it might.
all right, I will definitely be subscribing right now.
I don't know how I'm going to get it over to you across the Atlantic, but we'll work something out.
We'll figure a way.
Cool. Well, hey, Jeffrey, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to talk with you about Gym Leader Challenge and getting your insight, especially as one of the better players that we have in the online community. So thank you again.
It was my pleasure. I think this one was long overdue because I love everything you make. So I wanted to really come on the podcast and talk about CRC. And yeah, thank you so much for creating the GLC content. It's key to have information out there. That's how everybody gets better at the game. So that's hopefully what I inspired some people to make some more consistent lists, maybe make some more boring lists. But yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, then thank you for saying that. But I do feel like my win-loss rate is going to go down after everyone listens to your podcast and people just start beating me left and right. It's just going to be tough. So I think everyone's gotten at least, 2 percentage points better at Gym Leader Challenge because of your comment. So again, big ups to you on that. But again,
Thank you.
thanks to everyone for listening tonight. Again, this is the Let Loose podcast, the podcast dedicated to all things Gym Leader Challenge and the Pokemon TCG. Next week, we'll be back with a 2-episode week because I'm taking vacation that following week. We're going to be talking NAIC winner. Dino is going to be on to talk about the tournament. And then on Wednesday night, that's Tuesday, but on Wednesday night, we're going to be talking with Pellet, who's got a super sweet idea for how to expand badges to all the different types that aren't actually represented, like bug and ice. So I'm actually really excited about that episode too. But we'll check that out next week. But have a good night, everyone.